Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're comparing the Ryzen 7 5700X 3D with the i5 14400F. You may think the 5700X may make more sense, but you can actually find the X3D on AliExpress, for example, for less than the i5 or for similar money. Plus you can pick up a decent used market deal sometimes on eBay. So I thought we'd compare them today. Let's start with the CPU and productivity results. As you might expect, the i5 does outperform the 5700X 3D. The i5 is of course a 10-core 16-thread chip, that's 6 P cores, 4 E cores and 16 threads. The 5700X 3D is an 8-core 16-thread CPU. The CPU and productivity benchmarks here don't surprise me because the standard 5700X beats the 5700X 3D, likely due to the clock speed differences. So I wasn't surprised to see the i5 beating the X3D with the Cinebench and DaVinci Resolve tests. But let's move on to gaming. I tested at 1080p today with a 4080 Super so that we could see the biggest differences between these two CPUs. For Baldur's Gate 3 to start with, then 148 FPS for the Ryzen 7 with a 1% low of 78 and a 0.1% low of 45. These figures were an improvement over the i5 14400F across the board in terms of the average 1% and 0.1% number. With the 14400F we saw 113, 62 and 42 respectively. It is of course a decent effort for both chips, but as expected here, the 5700X 3D came out on top in this one. Keep your eye on the power consumption figures too, as that may be of interest to some of you as well. Next up we have the Blacksmith Wukong test. This is the in-game benchmark run. This was basically the same for both chips. Reason being is that even with both of these, the 4080 Super is the limiting factor. This is far more GPU intensive. It doesn't seem to care that much about what CPU you use, within reason, of course. I mean, both of these are fairly capable multi-core chips, and so there are no real issues with the game running at the high settings here. In fact, we're seeing well over 100 frames per second with both, 127 as an average. The 1 and 0.1% lows were slightly different, slightly in favour of the i5, but overall this was a negligible difference that you're not going to feel unless you have some sort of frame rate counter enabled. To be honest, it's a GPU limitation, so the results are going to be the same providing you've got enough CPU power. If you're using a high-end card like this, you're going to get identical results in a comparison. Cyberpunk 2077 next, and this is where things were a little different. I say a little, but quite a lot in terms of that average at least. 179 for the Ryzen 7 and 155 for the i5. The 1 and 0.1% lows were 95 and 55 for the Ryzen and 78 and 64 for the i5 CPU. Now this is an improvement over the i5 results for the Ryzen in terms of that 1% figure, but it was actually more consistent with the i5 when we take a look at that 0.1% number there. I don't think the 0.1% number matters as much. I've seen a lot of channels actually don't use that figure anymore, but I like to keep them all in just for the sake of clarity, to be honest. And honestly, you're not going to feel this difference between the two. The average here is significantly higher on the Ryzen 7, so that's still the best result, I think. When it comes to Forza Horizon 5, it's actually a similar situation. The average is better with the Ryzen 7, but the 1 and 0.1% lows this time are actually lower with the AMD chip, 125 and 83 compared to 133 and 116. Now this was a bit more consistent on the i5 CPU, but again the average was higher on the Ryzen 7. Is this the difference you're going to feel gameplay wise? Absolutely not, but I am wondering why these 0.1% differences and 1% differences in some cases exist with this chip, especially as some games don't seem to exhibit these issues. I use the word issues lightly. Maybe it's because some games just don't care about the higher amount of L3 cache, the 3D as it were, part of the chip. Kingdom Come Deliverance next. I like to include this one because it is very CPU intensive, and the differences were clear to see here basically across the board for the Ryzen. 111 as an average, 57 as that 1% low, and 28 as that 0.1% low. With the i5, we still saw a respectable result, 100 FPS this time, so 11 frames per second less. Our 1% low was about 6 frames per second less, and our 0.1% figure was quite a bit less. You could definitely tell there were more stutters here and there with the i5 CPU. Realistically, you're probably not going to pair either of these with a 4080 Super, unless you do plan on gaming at high resolutions. I hope you would be with a card like this, but of course we use a high-end GPU to get the most out of these CPUs and present a more visible difference, though with a lower-end GPU, differences are going to be even smaller. Red Dead Redemption 2. Up next, then we have the ultra textures, as always, with everything else set to high. This includes TAA. The geometry and grass level of detail sliders were also set to their respective maximum, and all the on-off options were basically set to on. Now, the 5700X 3D does exceptionally well in the benchmark run here, 207. I think it really appreciates the L3 cache here, 207 frames per second, 124 as that 1% low, and a 0.1% low of 99. With the i5, we got 152 FPS with a 1% low of 103 and a 0.1% figure of 92. So the differences get smaller as we go down the percentile figures there, but it is an overwhelming victory for the Ryzen 7 in this case. Team Red has pretty much destroyed Team Blue in this one. For Starfield then, to finalise, we have another victory for the Ryzen 7, perhaps as expected. That said, however, the percentile lows once again did suffer a little bit. We're looking at 42 and 13 compared to 44 and 29. Why that is, again, I'm not 100% sure. I guess maybe because some games don't appreciate the whole 3D thing. But there we go. I mean, it's still an improvement overall for the Ryzen CPU, and I think the main issue here was this stairs area. When we go down the stairs, both chips cause a little bit of stutter. It's just a little bit less stutter on the i5 CPU, but there we go. A comparison that perhaps not that many of you are considering, but it's another one to add to the roster of comparisons on this channel, and hopefully, if not now, maybe somewhere down the line, it will help one of you out. So, as always, thanks for watching. Leave your thoughts down below. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to, of course, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.